Good evening, good morning, everyone. My name is Antonio Kang. I'm the moderator of this session entitled Granular or Holistic Approach Enforcing Privacy and Rights in Complex ICT Ecosystems. I'm the coordinator of a project called PDP4E, which is sponsoring the session. And I'm going to introduce the members of the panel. The first is Naomi Lefkovitz. Okay. She is a senior privacy policy advisor at Nist, National Institute of Standards of Technology, and she is behind the development of the Nist privacy framework. Then we have Alejandra Ruiz, okay, ladies first, from Tecnalia. She's in charge of the division in her organization on modular assurance and certification of safety critical systems. Okay. Then we have Massimo Aterosi from EDPS. He's the deputy head of the technology and privacy unit of EDPS. He has a large experience on privacy, and he was the DPO of EDPS for a number of years, 6 years. Okay. And last but not least, we have Dimitri Van Landuit from the computer science department of KU Leuven, called Distrinet. And he's an expert in software engineering, but he's also part of the PRIZE project, which tries to connect privacy engineering with regulation. Okay. So we are going to switch to a number of slides. I'm going to present the introduction. Can we have the slides? Okay, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I have the slides. So I wanted to show to you actually that we are actually having concerns about ecosystems. Okay, granular means at a level of a system or an organization. Ecosystem means the whole list of organization of people involved in an undertaking. Okay, and the first slide I wanted to show was about a standard for smart cities. Okay, and it's called 3145-1. And it relates to smart city business process framework. So it's a framework for smart cities. What it says is we have governance, we have core processes, and it's very much domain oriented. So you have city enterprise, process, transport, health, resources, education, and so forth. Okay, so this is the first thing I wanted to show. The second thing I wanted to show is actually I was the editor because it has been published now of 27570 privacy guidelines for smart cities. Okay, and what we see is we have this vision where, given by actually GDPR or regulation, that we have the citizen, you have so-called data controllers or data protection controller, data processor, integrator, suppliers. They have privacy obligations. They need to do privacy impact assessment. They need to carry out privacy by design processes and the like. Okay, but at the end of the day, at the smart city level, we have to handle a whole bunch of requests from citizens of privacy impact assessments in plural, lots of agreements, and lots of contracts. Okay, so this is the plural thing that is complex. So the smart cities, they have to handle this incredible complexity. Okay, so which is actually the holistic issue. Then too bad I cannot show this slide, but standardization, we're working on something called data sharing agreement. Okay, and this is 23751. It's not published yet, but at the end, what it shows is that you can start with, say, an example of, say, 5 organizations. Okay, collecting and operating the cloud and brokers. Okay, and actually, if you look at them at the granular level, each of them to think about their problems of how data protection will be handled. But if you put them together, actually you have a number of ecosystems. And this is becoming important. And what actually we see is that at the end of the day, the data sharing agreement is the only thing that is visible for each organization. But in reality, someone else, us, or the smart city, we have to have the overall view. Okay. And my last slide is actually the last point was that I wanted to show that the system of system viewpoint is something that people have thought about, that the engineering people have thought about. In 2019, 3 standards were published. And what it shows is that you can have 2 organizations developing 2 systems, X and Y, and actually put them together in a system of system viewpoint, you have what we call an emerging capability. Okay, so something that is bigger than the sum of the 2. Okay, and actually, when it comes to security and privacy, we have the same thing, but at the other level. So each one has his risk management and the risk that he's let's say managing, but you put the 2 systems together and you have emerging risks. Okay, and this is the point that we need to tackle. Okay, so hopefully the slide will be made available to you, but now I want to switch, now that I've made this introduction, to the panelists, and I have a number of questions. Okay, the first question is whether we can have a framework. Okay, what kind of framework is needed? Can it help address issues raised by ecosystems? Can it help the issues raised by ecosystem practice, for instance, the data space? And we have Naomi Lefkovitz. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I will talk from my my viewpoint on the Nist privacy framework that we released, published just about a year ago. So we're just celebrating the 1st year anniversary, or birthday, as we've been saying. And I think that, one primary benefit of the Nist privacy framework is, we see it as a very good organizing and communication tool. And so, the framework really enables organizations to create what we call a profile of prioritized outcomes and activities to support privacy risk management and help organizations direct resources towards achieving their privacy objectives for their systems or products or services. And so organizations can certainly make profiles for themselves, specific to their organization. But they can also create what is often called a common profile. And so that would be more designed for, an industry sector or a community of interest, or, some sort of ecosystem. In fact, we actually created a term that we use in the framework, a data processing ecosystem. And by data processing, we define that as basically any operation being taken with data. So in the information lifecycle, so anything from collection through disposal, everything in between. As you've already said, Antonio, privacy risk can, be very challenging to manage, especially in the data processing ecosystem, since, many of the risks arise from the way data flows among different organizations, or from the different types of relationships among the organizations. So, and, I don't think that current laws really capture the reality of the data processing ecosystem that well. The laws tend to treat data relationships and flows as if they're kind of a linear chain, but that's not always the case. So, for example, app developers or IoT device manufacturers, they aren't necessarily collecting or processing any data themselves, but the way they have designed the apps or the devices can significantly affect privacy risk, which is occurring, at the organizations implementing the apps or devices in their system, where the processing is occurring. So, even in the absence of a common profile, we do think that the Nist privacy framework can be used to help organizations consider their role in the data processing ecosystem, and consider how their activities can be managed to either mitigate privacy risk that they may be contributing to the ecosystem, or hopefully to enable other organizations to better manage privacy risk. We had conversations some years ago in an IoT workshop, and we had some device manufacturer organizations there, and they were like, well, they said, well, we don't process any of the data. We don't collect it. We're just making the device. And we're like, well, but depending on whether, you can, the implementer of that device can configure the device to collect data differently, or, that would really impact their privacy risk. So even though you might not be collecting it, if you don't create those controls so that they can configure the device better, you're actually contributing to privacy risk. And they're like, oh, yeah, like kind of an epiphany. So we actually, thought of that as we were developing the framework, in the hopes that, organizations would, see those different outcomes that we put into the framework, and think about whether they're a device manufacturer, they can use it, whether they're, a traditional, data processor, collector, or controller, they can all use it from their particular standpoint. And, the one thing I would say is, we're hoping to put this theory to the test. So as a new resource that we're looking to get started this year, is to work with the community and stakeholders to develop actually a set of profiles for sort of the IoT ecosystem. So if anybody's interested, we would love to hear from you if you'd like to engage in that with us.
So the profiles could be international, right? It's not just profile for a company or a country. It's a profile per domain. So for instance, IoT domain and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Or smart cities, or whatever it might be.
So let's work together. Do you have questions or reactions to what Naomi explained? Okay. So and so my question would be to you is whether the Nist privacy framework, we can, let's say, use it at two levels: the level of an organization and the level of ecosystem. So we have actually two instances. Maybe could you have two profiles? I don't know. So is that something feasible?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've seen with the cybersecurity framework, sectors, for example, like the financial sector, developed, a common profile, but then an organization might take that and then, adjust it because, to their particular circumstances or environment, so that they might, add other categories or subcategories because of, particular things that they might be doing that they need to manage that risk.
And also, you were very careful to associate the Nist privacy framework with the cybersecurity framework. They're somehow compatible. So we can also, let's say, have a bigger picture where, of course, the security part of personal data protection will be taken care of, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. The privacy framework is, based on, was developed in an open, transparent process with stakeholders. And, we heard very clearly that they wanted it to be modeled after the cybersecurity framework in terms of sort of structure and, concepts in order to be able to use them together.
Yes, yes. And of course, standardization is going to be key, right? So I just want to make sure that you confirm that you want to push that towards standardization so that we can adopt the same framework.
Yes, we would always, Nist always promotes standards. So we would love
you have the word standardization in your acronym, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let's get to my second question, okay? And I'm going to ask Massimo and then Dimitri to react on that. So now that we know that we have complex ecosystem, we have organizations, we have humans, we have things, we have lots of parameters, okay? What kind of collaboration is needed, okay? Are there specific collaboration needs between stakeholders of the ecosystem about decisions on risk management, about architecture, engineering practice, contractual aspects? If I'm taking the Nist framework, You have, for instance, incident detection. So about all those things. Okay. So Massimo, what do you think?
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio. I mean, I think that within an organization already an holistic approach is needed. As you said, we might have an organizational framework and a multi-organizational framework. The challenge is how to best protect individuals, the personal data, having all the actors of the organizations to work together to a common goal, which is not often so much within the priorities of an organization. And the challenge grows further, multiplies when the personal data are processed in complex ecosystems, where it's not so clear where the data are, how they are used, who's responsible for what telephone number, for example, data subjects have to dial when they need to claim their data and ask questions. And organizations have to sort all this out and make so that the complex chain of controllers, joint controllers, processors, sub-processors, and last but not the least, as was saying Naomi, technology providers work well. So and allocate the responsibilities where they are. So there is the recent guidance from the DPP, for example, the concept of control and processors can give an idea what is at stake. An issue range from data governance and management to business processing, data flow design, from information architecture, software development, to establishing indeed contractually binding provisions, which are required by the law, by the way, and also are key to pinpoint effective remedies for data subjects. So, I mean, this is in particular managers, engineers, and developers face the difficulty to translate their protection compliance requirements into system design, and this is clearly amplified for complex ecosystems. We see that, for example, in our when we supervise trans-European systems. That's very difficult. You have a lot of stakeholders, and honestly, having a framework could help them in organizing things and plan, a priori. Also, before, during, for example, drafting of the legislative instruments, for example, and then at the operational stage. Let me go through also our history of technology monitoring in the DPS. We launched the idea of the IPEN, the Internet Privacy Engineering Network, in 2013, and you know about that. You have been participating a lot in that, to contribute filling the gap between lawyers and engineers, and also to make privacy by design a reality. But the basic idea from the beginning was to have a dialogue among stakeholders, so that this doesn't remain something on paper, but it's really a feature of IT systems and design. And from the beginning, we tried to take care both of privacy-friendly technologies, but also the need to consolidate the discipline of privacy engineering in a structured approach. For example, this year, we went for the exploration of the role encryption as an essential technology used in many different bricks. So you see the granularity of the privacy and data protection wall. But last time, for example, we tried to understand how privacy engineering has contributed to COVID-19 contact tracing apps endeavor. And in this case, we focused on the last element of the chain, the development of the apps, but it was very clear how the effectiveness of the protection on individuals depends on the multidisciplinary analysis of the problem in its entirety that involve all actors. So that's absolutely key. In the time, for example, we developed the concept of state-of-the-art, and we issued the EDPS preliminary guidance opinion on privacy by design, where we also called for a multi-stakeholders approach. And then we issue guidance on the protection of personal data in IT governance and management to give you institutions practical advice, not only on the SQL technologies, but mainly on the whole process of managing an information system through the entire life cycle, and also to have a key for the organization, but also to face with the other organizations. And all these efforts now converge in the new EDPS strategy, based on which we want to contribute to building this safer digital future. But through this helicopter view over EDPS and IPEN, I want to stress how we believe, and this is supported by our monitoring advisory activity, that engineering privacy and data protection needs always a two-way approach, both top-down and bottom-up, both granular and holistic, to identify technologies and components, as well as establishing a comprehensive approach that looks at the big picture, to reply also very precisely to your question, collaboration is needed at all levels you were mentioning, no doubt. So our risk management, for example, in data protection impact assessment, we believe it is important to have a cooperative attitude and go beyond the hesitations that certain organizations could have to share possible weaknesses or policies. And again, technical and semantic interoperability, for example, are the founding bricks for the architecture of complex systems, of course. And having a shared understanding and use of the state-of-the-art of privacy-enhancing technology, for example, is also essential. That's a brick of that. And to talk about other aspects, one delicate issue of complex system is identifying, for example, liability, so that there could be remedies for data subjects. And this is an element that should be clearly, we believe, reflected in contracts and calls for a fair collaboration agreements among parties. And finally, let me, I would like to say that the current focus on data spaces that we are witnessing now in Europe, for example, the ideas of sharing data for the common good, and also the role of data intermediaries calls even more loudly for shared approaches to business models and data flow design, but also to common risk management. And of course, the resulting safeguards, including the technical and organizational measures, as well as the much needed proper contractual agreements, can only be effective if they are the results of this kind of also holistic approach. That's what we believe.
Okay. I just want to note that you mentioned IPAN, and so it's an informal community, but very lively. And of course, I was involved. And 4 or 5 years ago, you asked me, well, IPAN asked me to manage a wiki on privacy standards. Okay, so it's available. Okay, I'm not making publicity here, but you'll find it. And actually,
I was going to mention that later on. Maybe I didn't forget you.
There's lots of people having a look at it. So, and it's just actually stating what privacy standards we are working on. Okay, and this has raised a lot of interest. So I just want to highlight that. Second thing I want to say is that you mentioned COVID-19, and of course we have the contact tracing capabilities, and of course when you do this, you have to track people. So it's really a very interesting use case for privacy. And actually, when it comes about measures, so actually I'm going to give the floor to Dimitri, maybe to answer that, or maybe if you want to react, is that we have to have measures that are technical, but we also have to have measures that are organizational. And the ecosystem is very important, okay? So this is something which I would say, when you take the holistic view, the organizational aspect is even more important, okay? And I think the Nist privacy framework doesn't preclude the fact that we need to come up with the organizational measure. Is that right, Naomi? So organizational measure is part of the picture, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we actually used the framework ourselves at Nist to at sort of a system level as we were developing a exposure notification solution. So so we absolutely used it at sort of the organizational level.
Okay. So Dimitri, the floor is yours, and I really suspect that when it comes to modeling and to collaboration, we need to have both the technical models and the organizational models.
Thank you, Antonio. That is right. So as Antonio already mentioned, I'm a researcher at the Department of Computer Science. You may know us for model-based analysis approaches such as Linden. More recently, we have also worked on model-driven tools to perform data protection impact assessment. We have a tool out that is called DPM. If you're interested, check it out. But what I want to say is that we are talking today about ICT ecosystems. And I would like to stress that nowadays, all ICT-related services are supported by complex ecosystems. Sometimes we forget how complicated these ecosystems are, but you have suppliers of hardware, of software, you have network operators that make sure that services can interconnect or talk to each other. We have reuse of libraries, we have integration of services, you have the strength of microservices. We have device manufacturers, we have platform providers, hardware providers, and so on. All of these stakeholders have an impact, as already explained by Naomi, on how a service will be delivered to an end user. And if you don't take into account all of these stakeholders, you may miss some important aspects of the system. So I would like to stress that whenever you think of a simple service, let's say you have a simple application running on your phone, it's not just one organization that makes sure that this application will do its thing. It's a number of complicated organizations working together. And so to come in a bit with a cliche, so if you ever have had a course on cybersecurity, there is this metaphor that people use. So you can spend a lot of resources on designing a very sophisticated lock for a very strong door, and you can work days and days on that to make that lock very burglary proof. But if you don't take into account that next to the door there's a fence over which you can just simply jump, you have not done a good job in terms of cybersecurity. I think this metaphor applies too when we're talking about data protection. So you can do your homework from your own individual perspective, and you can make sure that you encrypt data and so on and so on. But if you then do not take into account that this data still is accessible by other parties in the ecosystem, you're not doing a good job. So the holistic perspective, the perspective of taking into account all of the different participants here, is essential. So I think we need both. As I already mentioned a few times, we need to address the problem of data protection from an individual perspective. We need to invest in creating locks that work well, but we also need to take into account that perhaps on the line between your customer and your service, there is maybe somebody eavesdropping, or there's metadata being shared to third parties. And so from that point of view, we need these types of collaborations between organizations to do risk assessment. You cannot do risk assessment just from a single perspective, because you will miss things. Another thing I want to stress is that we're talking about ecosystems, and we tend to look at these things from the design perspective. So we are at the drawing board, we are thinking up how are we going to deliver a service. But actually nowadays, these ecosystems are highly dynamic. So at the moment that you are creating a product, it's not always clear who will be the actual providers and the actual suppliers. I've worked with applications in which they dynamically decide where to run the application based on price. So it's a cloud application. They just decide day by day which is the cheapest cloud provider, and they will pick that one. And so if you do this type of dynamic deployment and you don't take into account aspects of data protection, but just the aspects of price or performance or availability, you're not doing a good job either. And so the question that we have today is, how can we make these organizations collaborate better? I think we can draw some inspiration from how organizations work together when it comes to, for example, performance and availability. We have things like service level agreements. We have runtime policies that are enforced by complex systems, middleware platforms, and so on. And I think here as well, we need to codify some of the constraints that we want to enforce and make sure that we have systems that are smart enough to enforce them at runtime in the operation of the system. So that's what I had to say for now about the type of collaboration that we need. So I'm approaching this from a technical perspective, not so much from a legal perspective or an organizational perspective. But I think if we want to enforce these constraints, we need to also look at these types of platforms.
Yeah. Just one question. Of course, you are taking this from the technical perspective, but you're also taking it from the system engineering perspective. Yes. And the life cycle is very definitely an issue because you mentioned dynamics, but of course the system is changing because actually it becomes more intelligent. You integrate an AI system, he's learning new things, and suddenly the behavior changes. Okay, so we need. What do you think about that? We need to take that into account also, right?
Absolutely. So from traditionally, we have been looking at very static life cycles. You do requirements engineering, you draw up a system, you implement it, you roll it out, and then you're there. But nowadays, things have changed a lot. So we have trends like DevOps, continuous integration, continuous deployment, where you actually are updating the system continuously. So it's not a matter of you have time or space to think widely upfront about how the system will operate, but you will need to do this continuously. So somehow you will need to make sure that the constraints and the concerns that we have when it comes to data protection can also be embedded in this type of development practice. And that's I think what you're referring to as well.
Yeah. And Naomi, the Nist privacy framework, are you working on AI stuff, on these kind of, let's say, fully evolutive systems that actually might change again to get us into another level of challenge concerning privacy protection?
Well, yes, Nist is absolutely working on AI, and you know, some of that is at a very basic level, working on concepts around bias and explainability. In fact, there's a workshop going on right now on AI and explainability. But you know, from the framework perspective, you know, we were trying to, you know, think about how AI might fit in, and so, you know, we do have subcategories that are sort of focused around some of the process. So of, you know, both thinking about, you know, how do you build in the, you know, privacy, you know, objectives for, you know, from stakeholders. But not just that, but then sort of this feedback loop at the end when the outputs come out, if they're not the way the stakeholders actually thought they were going to be able to build that feed loop back in, to you know, feedback loop back in to make sure that you can adjust those outputs to the, you know, to the way you want them to be. So we do have you know, categories, subcategories on that to, you know, get organizations to start thinking about that whole design process.
Yeah, so the framework includes actually a method that we are building profiles. That's the message, and so you are very flexible. Okay, I have one question actually to Alejandra about that. If you consider the ecosystem, you remember, of course, Facebook versus Cambridge Analytica. This is an ecosystem. Actually, only 2 organizations were involved, but still something didn't go well. Okay, and so how do we? And I know because that's Alejandra's background. How do we can audit or certify what it is we have to do to do so that actually at least the policy people, they can verify that things are going smoothly? Okay.
So this is one of the main challenges we have now, because we are connecting systems that they were thought to be working standalone by themselves, and now we are connecting one to another, creating system of systems. And when we do these connections, we always forget about privacy. And there is, happens also with safety, security, and well, privacy is one of the things that people are mainly forgetting about it. And it's when we came and have these problems, these vulnerabilities. So one of the things that we can do, and is some work that has been going through that, is that try to expose, when we create a system, what we call assurance contract. So all these assertions that I said, well, I know my system, and if I have this information from my own system, I can't promise you that it will work this way if this is the environment where you connect me. So there should be this kind of technical assurance contract where both things, for assurance, but technical things that could appear emergency properties, because we never thought these systems were going to be connected this way. And if somehow the environment changes, there could be some privacy vulnerabilities. So this is one of the ways that they are doing it. But again, it's one of the problems we have, just because we are connecting systems with systems.
Just one thing I want to mention is you are working on our safety critical aspects, where obviously assurance, auditing, verifying the thing does what he says it does is very important. So there is a whole lot of discipline that works well. and which actually currently we push also in security. So we have common criteria for other things.
So
But
lots
my
of these
question
things appears from the safety point of view, where you have to say that the system is going to work this way and in no other way different. So I can't say that if it's going to go back and forward. I must also say, when I go straight forward, I won't move left or right. I always go straight forward. That's one of the things that needs to be done. Not only tech functionality, what is going to be done, but also what it won't at any time be done.
So the question to you, I think I didn't thought about it, but I think I want to raise it, is that we have to have in the future, okay, we need to have the assurance of a system, so granular level, and then we have to have the assurance of the whole system, holistic level, okay? So do you see that we can achieve that? Okay.
Yeah, I think
Sorry
it's
for the
going
hard
to
question.
be. I think it's going to be so complex, but we do need both. We do need to work at organizational level, and we need to go at a very deep level. So if we don't work in both levels, we will fail.
Yes, definitely. So I want to mention that in the health industry, there is a standardization organization called AAMI, and they have a standard called HIT 1000-1 on safety-related issues. And it's very interesting because they have one picture where they show that you have to do the assurance of a system, and then once you have done that, you still have to do the assurance of the integrated system. And they call it the assurance of the ecosystem. So, by the way, you can get this standard for free at NC.
Absolutely, that's good. If I may add something,
yes,
a consideration. I mean, if we look at the global reach of today's phenomena, they don't allow us any longer to work in isolation. And there is a same trend towards interoperability, data and services federation, for example, or edge computing, or in any case, greater control over your own data. This very trend implies a larger number of actors. So taking of their own responsibilities, and thus even more usable frameworks to protect the people and the data are needed. So I think it's also a specific need of a trend which is there for the positive, but also implies some challenges, and we need to address those challenges.
Exactly. Okay, so we are going to get to the third question, okay, which is the way forward. Basically, it seems that we have a consensus that the ecosystem level is something we need to address, and many of us have actually clues and approaches that which we can apply. Okay, so my question now, we hand the floor to Alejandra, is how this can work. Do we need a whole roadmap? Can we have a community? And actually, Naomi mentioned that she wants to go along that direction. And so I'm asking whether we can have slides or she has to talk and not using the slides. Okay, go ahead. Okay.
Oh, wow. I was just going to talk and talk.
Okay, so go ahead.
Go on. Go on. Go to the next slide. Whoops. I think the slides are not looking okay. Go to the next one.
You should go next. No, you see, there is an animation. Okay.
Okay. Now, just go to the next one. We have like 3 questions in one. So how can this work? Go to the next one. We just mentioned we do have models, and before we used to have these models as a way to in a miniature make what it will look like, and in a representation that it will work. Then these things are changing, and now we are going more into this software engineering and model-driven engineering, and get these models that. The good thing is that these models let us reduce the ambiguity, which is really important when we are creating a system. And once you have the model, you can go straight forward to the implementation. and you can be assisted by tools. So these things are going well. But this, please go to the next one. This thing of the models, it is also a good one for this application of privacy, because we can say in non-ambiguous way the capabilities for privacy protection, which is really important. When we talk with technical and not technical people, they usually they work isolated. It's hard for them to talk to each other and understand to each other. So this way, it's a good way to, this information goes bi-directional and we can talk and understand each other. It could include organizational measures. So once you have the system, sometimes you say, see the code over there, you have all the information you want. But when you need to have organizational measures, it is not possible to go to the source code. You really need kind of a model. Also, when you want to check if you have complied with some privacy standards, it's a good way to check this privacy compliance. And it's easier for others to check of it, and so you have some scrutiny from expert, which is a good way. Let's go to the next one. So we said we can have privacy by models community. So the idea is to have these models in open repository of models. So everyone could go and check them. And we can have two types of models, models for application of privacy protection and models for privacy engineering. Why I'm saying these two models? Well, the reason is because models for application of privacy protection will go more with overall governance, management plan, and the models for privacy engineering will go more with related to the engineering practices. So they will be more project independent, but specific for a specific domain. And some examples of this one will be privacy threat analysis, or models for privacy by design, models for privacy assurance. So we have all these kind of models that will be implemented in this project. All these models, we said that all these repository, we said that are at project level, but we need to have this community level because we do need to have this community to check these models, check how they are going to be stored, check their validity, all these kind of things. So we have the creation at project level, but also community level for that. Please go to the next slide. Just go to the next one. And the next one. So these are the two questions that you asked me. Do we need a roadmap? Can we have a community? Let's make this one like in a both one. So can we have a roadmap for a community? Please go to the next slide. So actually, we do have a roadmap where we can identify 3 main task force. So go to the next slide. The first task force is more towards operational governance, where what we need there, it's more on how this community is going to be managed, if we have a business model for this community, the way for communications. This is like the first thing that we should be working on. We need to connect with the open models to put it into open source. So the idea is that if you have the models into open source, it will be more easy that others will use it. And if we create models and just forget about the existing repositories, also this is not a good thing. So we need to do that also. As I said, we are also organizing the community, so we need the status of this community. Okay, so this is the first task force. Please go to the next slide. And we have the next task force, which will go more for privacy by model processes. In this type, what we need is to have kind of a use case to model this. So work on a template for this model. Also, it is important how are we going to validate these models and have examples so others could understand how we are using this model. So these are our main results, to have this privacy by model process guidance, so have kind of guidance on how are we doing this, and this model template. Go to the next slide. And finally, we have this, the task for the third task force. So we need to go to the initial project. What we do need is, well, some of what at the beginning Antonio mentioned, one of the project that it's supporting this panel, PDP4E tools. This is privacy for data protection, privacy and data protection for engineering tools. So this is the idea of creating these tools. So we do have one kind of this new project, and also for this is for privacy engineering. For application of privacy protection, the idea is to put it on one specific domain, which could be the CITC domain, which just we just talked about it before in another question. So this is the main results that we're going to have for this task force. Please go to the next one.
Just to mention for you concerning, so this says that, of course, we need to agree on tools, but we also need to agree on applications, okay? And we have so many. One is the connected vehicles, and I've been talking with the fintech people, with health and IoT, smart buildings. So we have as many systems as we can. We can apply, say, the Nist privacy framework. We come up with a profile. Out of the profile, we identify the common models, and we make them available so that people who are interested, they use the same practices. Okay, that's the idea.
Yeah. So the good thing of this is that we have started. There are tools there that are over there that we can use. Is that to start working on it, we need to start with something. So let's go back to the slide. So this is, now go to the next one. This is, as I said, an example of this project. Go have some animation, please press go on. So here in this project, we work on requirements, modeling, assurance. So move to get more animations. Actually, there are tools there. So some of the things that we mentioned are there. We can apply the Nist framework, and this is something that is being looked at it. Lindum, for example, also it's another thing that we need to check, and creating some tools to support this. For modeling, have UML as the language. From assurance point of view, there are not so many tools, but there is one which is open there, which is open third, which is the one I am behind the development. Please go to the next slide. So we said that we have this project, and we do have a roadmap. So one of the things that we started to have is to create the first round of consultation. We can have now in this panel a debate on how can we create this roadmap, create some statement of the objectives, start creating some operational. The next time that we will work, that we will have some results, the next deadline is in June, where we hope we have some potential commitments, and we start having some kind of community business plan. As I said, is one of the first things that we need on the first task force. We had now one first round of consultation in June. We will get like a second potential round of consultation. So this is before could be in press face-to-face meetings. Now everything goes virtual. So we will see how this goes. And so by the end of this year, the idea is to have commitments, get some sponsors, have already the status on the governance of this community, have a logo and a website, right one, and getting the first models to publish there. So, and let's hope that for the next CPDP, we can make like a good and nice announcement of this. Please go to the last slide. So I don't know if you could see it, but there is a link actual of what how it is at this moment, how it looks like our community on this. At the moment, it's Eclipse Foundation. It's behind it. The good thing of that is that they already work on community, and they are already a community. They are connected to open source projects. So this is a good thing for us, and they can help us creating our business model. So we are starting creating our community. We need you, so please come and join. And we do have some ideas on how this community is going to be with this roadmap for the whole year, which is going to be tough.
Thank you, Alejandra. It's a big program. Of course, I'm part of it, so it's a little bit hard for me not to provide comments. But one thing I want to mention is I saw you mentioned Eclipse. And it seems that it's going to be important that a good organization make with the right resources and also the right level of commitment. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, that's good. And of course, I'm part of it, and we'll hope we were discussing with all the stakeholders. And so I'm looking at Massimo. Can you help us in making that kind of thing happen? Okay, of course, because you are a kind of policy maker, but I would also have asked to other countries' policymakers. Okay, so we are on the same boat, right? We're not trying to compete on that. We're just trying to solve it. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now let me tell you an anecdote, because that's functional to the considerations that Alejandra was doing now, and also says how these kind of initiatives are needed. I mean, if we, currently we are discovering that certain online platforms and services are not longer just for fun, but they deeply influence our personality, the society, business, democracies, and become really public infrastructures of a digital life that is no longer only digital. And we have talked about that yesterday, exactly at the EDPS Civil Society Summit. And when the idea of the smart meters, you remember all that. The smart meters was at the outset, so before the GDPR approval, the European Commission felt the need to somehow regulate. It was not a regulation, a recommendation, and standardize at EU level all the smart grid, smart meters ecosystem. You remember that?
Yes.
And including on privacy and data protection, security, of course. Because why? Because that was, energy. So traditionally a public utility. So there was a large number of deliverables and a lot of standards at the ETSI level, for example, and Senelec. And and they used a lot of models. And the DPIA that was performed, and there was the first big sectoral DPIA performed at European level on smart meters, took advantage of this modeling that was made before. And nobody thought at that time of the huge role that the online platforms would have gained soon for society. Far more intrusive than the smart meters as such, I would say. And now we are trying to rein all this in the aftermath of a process that is difficult to reverse. So I believe there is still room, and there is now room, and need for roadmaps, communities, common practices, starting from the basic, interoperability issues. And those changes, both in business models, but also in the sustainable use of technology, cannot be carried out without a common strategy, an interoperable use of methodologies and tools. And I think really that business and sectoral communities should pull together and work for this. And by the way, this can also be reflected in codes of conduct in sectors and the adoption of standard best practices for a sort of holistic interoperability. And I would say furthermore that in those contexts where sensitive data are shared and processed, for example, health data spaces now, I personally believe that this cannot even be left to spontaneous processes that should pinpoint all the thingy, but should somehow also be regulated, and frameworks can absolutely support this endeavor. So as EDPS, we are absolutely happy to be in the number to support all kinds of effort to this aim, and somehow as we can communities in the way Alejandra was designing, and we can already talk about that for this year's initiatives. Okay. Thanks.
I have a question to Dimitri. All the endeavor we have, like Naomi, what we do, okay, I think it's not just for marketing. So we cannot just say we solve it for you and do not have the right approach, okay? So I'm always afraid that sometimes we say we solve it for you, and that actually we are not doing it, okay? So we need people like you, I mean, people who are, or Alejandra, who are more on the scientific side and say, okay, this is the right way of doing it. So if you do models, do it to that level, because if the model is not saying anything, it's not a good quality, we didn't solve it. So can you react on that? So we need to make sure that we have the best practices and engineering and scientific practices, right?
Yes, absolutely. So from a software engineering perspective, this makes a lot of sense because nobody wants to reinvent the wheel. And from a high level of abstraction, we are looking at the same problem over and over again. Life is becoming more and more connected. There are a number of organizations involved in the continuous collection and processing and storage of personal data. And we have to avoid solving the same problem in different sectors or in different domains times and times over. So the idea of having reference solutions, models that solve these problems and can be reused across multiple domains is definitely a very good idea. So I'm not sure if that answers your question from a technical point of view. I think, of course, the Eclipse ecosystem is the best choice in terms of model-driven engineering because they have a lot of mature tools and plugins in Eclipse that are already far ahead in that respect.
And I can confirm they are interested to drive the thing. So question to Naomi, of course, probably you went into this Nist privacy framework initiative just to solve exactly this. And then because if it is of a good quality and it is scientifically sound, it can go to standardization.
Yeah, so you're asking about the standardization path?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've, been talking about that, and I'm very interested to hear whether there would be support for that. We've gone down a path with the cybersecurity framework, and so, we're interested in thinking, should we follow that same path or should we do a different one? But, we're very open, but, with the thing about standards is it's a consensus-based activity. And so I think we would want to get some sense from the community whether there is an appetite for that standardization.
Yeah. As you know, we have ongoing standards on IoT for privacy and security. Of course, Nist is involved. We are following, and also there is one on consumer privacy by design for consumer goods and services. They will come up with a number of requirements that are unnecessary, and all those have to be taken into account. Okay, I also want to mention that. As an example, as an anecdote, we mentioned as maybe the first application in which we would work, because Alejandra and myself were working on that, on the connected vehicle, the car-to-car communication, where we have the problem of being able to track a vehicle. Okay, if you track a vehicle, you have privacy issues, definitely. So you have to come up with a solution which actually is specified, so that actually you are sure that you have the right level of privacy protection, okay? And today, even though the specs are available, so in IEEE, ISO, TC204, ETSI, all those things are there, those documents are complex and not specified at a level which is understandable. And we need to have the model, okay? And this is actually one of the undertakings we have in mind, is actually to re-express. We do not reinvent the wheel. We just re-express it in a way that people can understand. So there is, so now it's a question also to Dimitri also, because we don't need to reinvent a privacy protection. We just need to express it in a clear way, okay? And model-driven engineering can help us, right?
Absolutely. So the only challenge you will have is that the model is an abstraction of a system, and you can prove properties over a model, but if the model is deviating from the actual system, you may still run into problems, and that's a technical problem that needs to be solved if you focus on model-driven engineering or model-driven analysis. So we are looking at an abstraction. It's like a summary of something, but if the summary is not corresponding to the actual reality, then maybe what you are deriving from the model is not correct.
Yeah.
And so these types of problems will have to be addressed.
Yeah, and I see two ways of handling it. One is, of course, the theory, and yourself, you find ways to demonstrate formally the thing. It will happen, I'm sure, but maybe not for everything. And the second thing is, now, Alejandra, so we need to have assurance. So someone will check that the model, even abstract, is implemented in a proper way. And you will do it maybe in a non-automatic way, but with human intelligence, at least to check that the implementation follows the model. Is that right, Alejandra? So that's why assurance is a key part of the whole picture.
Yeah, definitely. So and this is something that, for example, the GDPR is asking. You do not only need to do the things right, you also need to demonstrate that you are behaving correctly. So we need a way to demonstrate that this is the right model and it's taking care of all the privacy needs.
Yeah. So question back to Naomi. In the Nist privacy framework, you have activities called govern P, protect privacy, and communicate P. So this relates to this precise concern, right? Those two activities.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So govern is very much about, both the policies, but also we have a sort of monitoring and review, which is, sort of assuring that those policies are actually implemented and working. And, communicate is also, again, some of the typical privacy notices, but also, again, that aspect of being able to communicate both internally and externally, whether it be reporting or otherwise. So.
Yeah. So I have a last question, and then I will give the floor. Maybe if you have a last statement, is let's talk about data space. Okay, you know that in Europe this is strong, but I think not only in Europe. So people are definitely thinking that, as I said, data is the oil of the future. Maybe it's oil of today, actually. And but data can, of course, include, in many cases, personal data. So isn't it time to think about approaching what we have in mind, in particular to the realm of data, big data, data analysis, and things like that. So maybe I'm going to ask Massimo his reaction, because you mentioned the data space previously.
Absolutely, I think this is something which is needed. Of course, it's not as simple as that. In particular, when there are so many stakeholders that are involved, and the industry is varied, and so I think that also a sort of input from from the policymakers could be something that can help in that. I mean, data space is also, for example, in the Digital Governance Act. I mean, there are proposals also for the role of intermediaries. I mean, it is important that there is this need. I mean, this is just not a need, but it's something which everybody, including the legislator, feels as essential to coordinate the actions, to pull everybody together. Otherwise, I mean, this cannot be left just to the initiatives of someone. That initiative has to exist, but should be leveraged through something which, at the end of the day, is felt as needed by who has the power to do it. So I think that the two aspects, I mean, the pushing from from communities, from the bottom, as you are doing, and also feeling that this is necessary from the policy making point of view, is the two kinds of push are essential now for this kind of data spaces and the way to manage them.
Yeah, exactly. And we will need your help if we want to go into application domains where we are entirely focusing on data analytics and the data sharing, okay? Because those are actually becoming the big applications of the future, okay? So yeah. I'm going to ask each one whether you have some conclusion statement. So Naomi, you first, whether you have a conclusion statement. We have like 1 minute, so you have like 15 seconds, sorry.
No pressure. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's been a great panel, and thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to working with everyone here on furthering this, because it's a really big issue, and we have to follow the reality of the way the data actually is processed. So.
Thank you. So Dimitri, so you have the last word, actually, 22 seconds.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have seen consensus that we need to approach this both from an individual perspective, but from an ecosystems perspective. And I think that is unique. I mean, I don't see many approaches that focus on the ecosystem perspective. So this is very exciting for me.
Yeah, very good conclusion. Very good conclusion. Okay, thank you very much. And it was a really nice panel. So we'll meet each other maybe next year. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
So bye-bye.